We begin our journey with a classic example, the Little Albert experiment. This renowned study was aimed at conditioning a fear response in a young boy named Albert, using a white rat and a loud noise. Through repeated exposure, Albert soon learned to associate the rat and by extension similar white fluffy objects with the fear-inducing noise. The process and results of this experiment raised significant ethical concerns as a stark reminder of the importance of maintaining moral boundaries in psychological research. So let's delve deeper into the topic. Have you ever pondered about the moral boundaries that should exist in psychological experiments? A provocative query, yet it's a question of paramount importance. When we imagine the sphere of science and research, scientists in white coats conducting experiments in sterile labs often come to mind. But what transpires when the lab is the human mind? The of psychological research is a delicate one. Here, the subjects aren't merely test tubes or petri dishes, but people with thoughts, feelings, and emotions. In this intricate terrain, ethics isn't just a matter of scientific procedure, but a question of human rights. It's the boundary that ensures the dignity, autonomy, and well-being of subjects. A line drawn in the sand separating exploration from exploitation, curiosity from cruelty. Yet history is filled with instances where this line has been blurred, where the foreknowledge has overshadowed the respect for human dignity. Such instances underscore the importance of these boundaries, not just as a formality, but as a fundamental principle. Psychology delves into human behavior, emotions, and cognition. It seeks to decipher why we act the way we do and how we can improve. Yet in this pursuit, the subjects of study aren't merely data points, but people with their own stories and rights. So where do we draw the line? How do we balance the pursuit of knowledge and respect for human dignity? These are questions that every psychological researcher must grapple with, defining the very essence of ethical psychological research. The year was 1920, and a man named John B. Watson embarked on an experiment that would forever change the landscape of psychology. This was the dawn of the era of behaviorism, a new and controversial school of thought that proposed the idea that all behaviors are learned rather than innate. Watson, a former president of the American Psychological Association and professor at Johns Hopkins University, teamed up with his graduate student Rosalie Rayner to conduct a series of experiments. Their goal was to demonstrate that emotional responses could be conditioned in humans, just as Ivan Pavlov had done with dogs a few years earlier. The subject of their experiment was a 9-month-old infant known to history as Little Albert. Little Albert was chosen for his calm demeanor. He was not easily frightened, and he showed no particular fear of any objects presented to him. Watson and Rayner seized this opportunity to prove their hypothesis that fear could be learned. To conduct their experiment, they exposed little Albert to various stimuli such as a white rat, a rabbit, a dog, and a fur coat. Initially, Albert showed no fear towards these objects. However, Watson and Rayner began pairing the appearance of the white rat with a loud, harsh noise that startled and scared the child. Over time, little Albert began to associate the white rat with the frightening noise, and he would cry and try to crawl away whenever the rat was presented, even in the absence of the noise. This was the first empirical demonstration of classical conditioning in humans. However, it's important to note that Watson and Rayner's experiment was not conducted in a vacuum. It was a product of its time, set against the backdrop of a society grappling with the implications of Darwin's theory of evolution and Freud's psychoanalysis. It was a time when the nature versus nurture debate was at its peak, and Watson and Rayner's experiment was a bold statement on the side of nurture. And so, the stage was set for an experiment that would alter our understanding of human behavior and the ethical boundaries of psychological research. A 9-month-old baby boy, known to us only as Albert, was chosen as the subject for this groundbreaking study. Now let's delve into the specifics of the experiment that would forever change the way we understand human behavior. The process was simple yet innovative for the time, revolving around the concept of classical conditioning, a term coined by the Russian physiologist Ivan Pavlov. This theory postulates that behaviors can be learned via association, a notion that was put to the test with little Albert. The experiment began with presenting Albert with a white rat. Initially, the boy showed no fear of the rat, even reaching out to touch the creature with an innocent curiosity. This was the first step, establishing a baseline of Albert's natural responses, devoid of any external influences. Then came the conditioning. Each time Albert reached out to touch the white rat, a loud noise was made by striking a steel bar behind his back. The abrupt, harsh sound startled Albert, causing him to cry and exhibit signs of fear. The experimenters, led by John B. Watson and his graduate student Rosalie Rayner, repeated this process several times, forging an association in Albert's mind between the white rat and the fear-inducing noise. After a while, the mere sight of the white rat was enough to trigger a fear response in Albert, even without the accompanying noise. This was the desired result, the proof of concept that fear and emotional response could indeed be conditioned. But the experiment didn't stop there. Its reach extended beyond the confines of a single white rat. Watson and Rayner introduced other similar objects to Albert, such as a rabbit, a fur coat, and even a Santa Claus mask. Each of these items elicited the same fear response, demonstrating the concept of generalization in classical conditioning, where a conditioned response spreads to similar stimuli. However, this was not a tale of triumph in the pursuit of knowledge. Instead, it was a story that would stir controversy and raise questions about the ethical boundaries of psychological research. The experiment, as groundbreaking as it was, had severe implications for Albert. His newfound fear was not just a temporary side effect of the study, it was a lasting impact, a conditioned response that was never unlearned. Moreover, there was no informed consent, no ethical review board, and no consideration for the potential psychological harm inflicted upon a child. Albert was subjected to intense fear and distress, a fact that cannot be overlooked or understated. The experiment concluded, leaving behind a legacy that was as controversial as it was influential. The Little Albert experiment, for all its scientific significance, remains a stark reminder of the ethical boundaries that should never be crossed in the pursuit of knowledge. But what happened to Little Albert after the experiment concluded? This is a question that has loomed large in the annals of psychological history. The aftermath of the experiment is a tale fraught with potential psychological harm and controversy. The Little Albert experiment, conducted by John B. Watson and Rosalie Rayner in 1920, involved conditioning a 9-month-old infant dubbed Little Albert to fear white, furry objects. The experiment was successful in the sense that Little Albert did indeed develop a fear of these objects. However, the consequences were far more profound and far-reaching than mere experimental results. It is believed that Little Albert was left with a permanent fear of white, furry objects, a fear that was not naturally occurring but was inflicted upon him for the sake of an experiment. This is where the ethical implications come into play. The experiment was conducted without the consent of Little Albert's mother, who was a wet nurse at the hospital where Watson and Rayner were employed. It is also worth noting that no efforts were made to decondition Albert's fear following the conclusion of the experiment. The controversy surrounding the experiment's ethical implications is not mere academic debate. It is a matter of human rights and dignity. It calls into question the very nature of psychological research and the lengths to which researchers are willing to go in the pursuit of knowledge. Pursuit of knowledge, we must remember that the ends do not always justify the means. The sanctity of human dignity, respect for persons, and the commitment to do no harm should always take precedence over scientific curiosity or the quest for new insights. The Little Albert experiment serves as a poignant lesson, emphasizing the importance of ethics in psychology. Indeed, the tale of Little Albert serves as a stark reminder of the need for ethical boundaries in psychological experiments, a lesson we must never forget.